That again.
Okay. Ready? Now, you don't have any experience judging, correct?
Correct.
Is there anything specifically you're looking for, or just?
Nope.
All right. Here we go then.
Sorry.
Alright. The resolution for the debate round is as follows. Resolved. A government's legitimacy is determined more by its respect for popular sovereignty than individual rights. Now that's pretty long and complicated, so let's break it down. Essentially, the resolution asks us a simple question. Simple to understand, but not so to answer. The question is, what makes a government legitimate? And when presented with a conflict, should the government follow the will of the people, or should it follow a set standard of rights? That's the question we'll be attempting to answer today. Now we'll look at the round in two completely separate areas. First, we'll establish what governmental legitimacy is, and what it is not. After that's defined, we'll look at the two terms we're presented with, popular sovereignty and individual rights, and see which better leads to that legitimacy. So first, what is legitimacy? Merriam-Webster Collegiate Dictionary defines legitimate as being exactly as purposed. Now this definition makes sense. When you create something, an organization for instance, and give it certain responsibilities and powers, you set the boundaries of its legitimacy. If it deviates from the purpose it's been given, or if it takes more powers than it was allotted, it becomes illegitimate by defying its boundaries. Therefore, governmental legitimacy is established by the purpose with which it was endowed. I believe that purpose should be established by the people, and not by rights, as we'll see as we move down to the body of my case. First, let's define two key terms, popular sovereignty and individual rights. Popular sovereignty is defined as the concept that political and legislative power resides with the citizens. In this round, I'll be using the catchphrase, the will of the people, synonymously with popular sovereignty. Individual rights are defined as the basic rights which it is generally considered all people should have. Now, I'm not going to take the stance that rights are bad. I wouldn't argue that. However, I would argue that the purpose of government is not limited to rights. So my value in today's round, what we're trying to uphold, is legitimacy, governmental legitimacy. The way we uphold that, or the criterion, is popular sovereignty. So point one, the purpose of a government is broad. If a group of people come together and create an organization for the purpose of, say, security, then the duty of their organization is to protect security. Nothing more, nothing less. If the duty of an organization is created for philanthropy, the organization can draw from the coffers of its members in order to fulfill its purpose. If it's created to ensure economic stability, it can do what it must to ensure that that is upheld. Each of these three organizations have different purposes, and they have to carry out that purpose. They can't decide they want to uphold life, liberty, and property. They follow the purpose they're given to be legitimate. A government creating its own path and purpose, even a purpose of rights, is a violation of legitimacy by definition. So think of the government as a large company, built on that same principle. People come together and create it. They give it certain boundaries. They set the limits of its power and give it a purpose. Its duty then is not to decide that it wants to protect rights, but rather to follow the purpose that it's given. So again, a government creating its own purpose, even a purpose of rights, is a violation of legitimacy by definition. Point two, the purpose of government is not limited to rights. Now this is built directly on point one. If government can be established with all sorts of different purposes and emphasis, then it logically follows that it cannot be limited to rights. Let's look at a few different countries to examine this. The people of Russia, when they created the government, did not emphasize rights as much as they did centralized force and strength. They wanted a strong security, a strong government. National security, this is what the people chose to focus on. Canada's public supports their health care option. The majority of the people like the public health care, even though it means giving up some of their property rights in exchange for that. However, if public health care was forced upon a population, in which that's not what the people wanted, that would be considered a violation of the people's will, and would therefore be illegitimate action. So different governments, all legitimate, have different purposes, but they all have one thing in common. That purpose has to be determined by the people, and this is really the crux of the case. Different governments, all legitimate, have different purposes, but that has to be decided by the people. And that leads me to my third point in the round. Popular sovereignty determines the purpose of government. If governments can be endowed with different purposes, who determines what the purpose is? Either it's going to be the people, or it's going to be the government, a majority or a minority. Because the government is created of the people, by the people, for the people, just like with any organization, the people decide what purpose they want their government to serve, because they create the government. Now, before I close, I'd like to look at a few things that happen in America that really would be considered a violation of rights under our resolution, but is considered perfectly acceptable because it's the will of the people. Let's look at some services. We give up a lot of our property to the government to be used for various services that we all enjoy, such as libraries, state parks, education for those who can't provide it for themselves, maintenance of national landmarks. Look at highways and the liberties we sacrifice in limiting how fast we can drive. Highways that provide merely convenience and save traveling time. None of these protect our rights, but we give up a portion of our rights in exchange for those services, in exchange of rights for what we want from the government. And it's considered perfectly legitimate, so as long as it's what the people want. So legitimacy is defined by purpose. By definition, that's what it means. The people should decide the purpose of government, not the government itself, and it can't be limited simply to rights. It's whatever the people decide. Thank you.
Judge and time already? Alright, hello Whitney, how are you doing today?
Hello, Rebecca. I'm doing well.
Alright, good. Just a couple questions for you. So do you think that, you said the purpose of government can be very broad, so basically it can be just about anything, right?
Yes, whatever the people want.
And would you say that this is always morally correct?
Not always, no. But again, legitimacy isn't dealing with moral absolute, it's dealing with purpose as definition.
Alright. You said individual rights are rights that all men have. For clarification, would you agree that this is basically, in today's day and age, life, liberty, and property, God-given rights?
In today's day and age, life, liberty, and property are generally considered that.
Mm-hmm.
There are some countries that don't accept those definitions, and these aren't always the definitions that have been used. But it's a pretty good definition.
Okay. Do you like having life?
I enjoy my life.
Liberty?
Yeah.
And the right to property?
Yes.
Would you say that most people, would you say that our judge likes having his life, liberty, and property?
Most likely.
Do you think that your sister likes having her life,
Yeah.
liberty, and property?
People in general like life, liberty, property. And in fact, that's what they can institute in their government if they want. But sometimes they want more than that.
Alright, do you think that the majority, if we just follow purpose, do you think that what the majority wants could disrespect the minority's wishes?
Sometimes, yes. The majority and the minority do not always agree. There will always be contention. But we have to choose the majority decision, or we have to choose the minority decision. So it's better to go with what the majority of the people want.
But don't most everyone like life, liberty, and property anyway? So if we're following life, liberty, and property, wouldn't that make the majority happy?
Sure.
Alright.
Unless they want more than that, which they're allowed to dictate. As I said, sometimes you give up, say, property in exchange for libraries. I love libraries.
Right.
I'm not entitled to them. It's not my right.
Mm-hmm.
But when I pay taxes, I will happily pay them for libraries. Now, Riley our brother, doesn't like libraries,
True.
but he's still going to pay taxes for them.
When he's older.
Right. He's going to be in the minority. Unfortunately, he's going to have to deal with that.
Alright. You talked about Russia and Canada's healthcare. Would you say that these services, such as security or healthcare, are to enhance their rights?
Not necessarily. Like, healthcare in some instances could save your life, but in other instances, you can get a cast put on a broken bone, you can go for a cold or for some illness that you figure out you don't actually have. So it wouldn't always protect life.
Alright. And you talked about how America, we have things such as schools, libraries, roads, etc. that aren't rights. Would you say that, so you agree that when you form a government, you have to give up rights to make it, correct?
Correct.
Would
A
you
government
say that
requires various sacrifices of
in
rights.
most all cases, those rights are given back?
In a lot of instances, yes, people will try to enhance their rights.
Mm-hmm.
The point is, it's not just to focus on rights. If the people decide there's another purpose, the government has to follow that purpose. It can't say, sorry, no libraries for you, you're keeping your property.
Alright, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cut time in 30-second intervals, please.